Hi everyone, hopefully we get the workroom updated once our video is completed. We are at Leading This Generation 2024, that is structure this year, and we are by part 2 of our structured education this year. Our structured education is exactly that our generation's requirement to respond to what is building office and what does building office means to us. I've last week discussed our SARS room. I've discussed the requirement for our offices to be managed in a way that today is fine for our generation, and I've discussed some points on my career history and what brought me to the education of building office in our generation, and really what is the requirement for our generation today to abide to, right? For us as a generation today, we have a lot to respond to. We have a lot that our generation are required to respond to with also. And for me, Ribea, Elise, today, I find myself in the room of Ribea, Elise. That is my Mama Anna Philander's womb, right? I find myself in the upbringing of me, Ribea, Elise, in my season. And I know what about business, I really present a lot in being a mother. And we have to so often say that because we live in a generation that goes to put us in the room of a man today, right? And when I'm dressed today, I have my body shirt on, I have my green pants on, I have my yellow belt on to color the season that our generation sometimes in social media has learned to edit our videos so that we look like the man in the video, so that we look like the harsher part of our generation in the video, and so that we come forth as an aggressor amongst humanity. So I'm always kind on requesting that social media business owners, Instagram, when we do a live stream video, that they get the rooms right so that they don't edit men edits into our rooms. That creates a lot of aggressions amongst our generation. Another thing why they might do it is because we are women and we give birth to men, but it gives us no reason to corrupt our generation, because to corrupt someone is to give a message of someone forth that might sometimes not be it, right? If you give up a message forth after Ribea, Elise today, when our generation are educating structure Instagram rooms, then you sometimes are really manipulating our generation. And I'm very kind and requesting that when I do my live stream videos, that everyone gets the rooms right the whole time, and that they don't shift in edits that sometimes are disruptive to the education that we are giving. So I just had to quickly do that request to the Instagram business owners so that they get their teams that are working in our rooms, because it's rooms that we are having, and they create rooms for us sometimes before we do the video and before we present the video, and sometimes the room are edits of men amongst humanity, and then they want that to be the room that we present, and then it makes your whole image looks different. So I just want people to get the edits right the whole time. And our videos, we are kind to say that anyone can do anything that they want to, but I'm also very kind to say, because I'm educating structure, do not disrupt our videos if it's not necessarily having to be disrupted, right? Last week we did SARS, our structured program, and with SARS I educated somewhat on the requirement for South African government to build office based on the fairness required in our country itself. I've mentioned last week in our room the seat that South African government has in political opinions amongst different international countries. I have mentioned last week, and I'm going to add on to that this week, is when you have a seat amongst different countries in the international world, you have an opinion to give amongst international requirements for the world to respond at. And then as a country, we have an obligation, right? And I do not do my videos to point a finger at the government or at hunt process. We are in a generation where we have to look away from people wanting to point finger, and we have to look at what is really the requirement for our generation to adhere to, and specifically for the political house, political leaders, governmental houses, and for everyone that plays part in the international discussions about countries and our peoples. What is our requirement for us to adhere to when we learn what is happening around us in the international world? And therefore, today, I'm kind in saying that my requirement in my education and my requirement for the processes in our country to adhere to the requirement that the international world has had me bring attention to my career history. And today I'm going to explain my career history, because every time when I talk, people shift your business into an Aisha business room, Malvina Lachikan Abrams, that has been disturbance to my about business education. That is my business and my career history itself. So I have to mention so that people do not divert attention away when I'm requiring my opinion to not aggress where I'm at. The moment that you divert my opinion is the moment that you are aggressing an international country. The moment that you divert what I'm saying, and that's why I'm educating the international world. What does my education about relate to? What is my requirement amongst our generation? And where I find myself at in Auckland, New Zealand, where the responsibility becomes Ribea has been employed at the offices. Ribea's had on-hand training. Ribea exactly knows and understands the requirement, and they exactly employed Ribea on the journey that is the requirement to respond to that in a way that when a business and when our generation needs to structure itself, what is Ribea's offers, employment, career history? How am I required to play part in what our generation requires in time and in season? And how do I respond to that in person? And that is why I draw our attention always to not necessarily about businesses' requirement for whatever Avoke are doing to be accepted in her country, but my responsibility having been an employee at certain offices, right? When you get to certain offices, you learn the office standards. You know the office requirement are always on the notice boards. You learn what companies and organizations your office works with. And I have been and had the opportunity to be employed for more than 30 years at Nibblebits that were really in line with governmental international businesses. That is exactly where I find myself at today in my season in an international country, and how the processes and businesses in South Africa affect the international world. And therefore, our structured program today, I want to focus on point number one today, once again, that allows us into the room of Nibblebits, where I've been employed at, starting as a trainer at Nibblebits, and really my career history, that today Nibblebits' name has changed into Rhodes Foods, or Inter something. I'm going to get to the name again. And when I get to the name again, we can find out where we are at in the communication and in the requirement for a business in the international world to really structure itself and to really build office in a way that is fine and fair for the country itself. I've been employed at Nibblebits since 2011, right? And I remember starting in May 2011 at Nibblebits, and the human resource manager those years, and that employed me into the role, and it brought my attention to how did he get to employ me, and I have not applied for the role. And I remember him saying that he received my CV those years from Boland College, where I started and where I received my educational history, and the office then in an immediate instance after they changed. And I remember the office managers that came in from different European backgrounds, that is your white Afrikaner, and we had managers from Germany, we had general managers and managers from France, we had managers from England itself, and so there was a very kind of different European main managers that were managing the processes in the country, right, and at the business itself. And I then at the time got a promotion. I remember working in human resources, and then from trainer, administrator, recruitment, and office assistant, the different human resources roles that I've been employed at. And then they gave me the health and safety officer role, right? And I went on trainings and I learned the processes in the country itself. I learned the requirement that we as a country and as business owners have to respond to the fairness required amongst our country itself. Why? Because the country, then we learned at Nibblebits exactly, Nibblebits who were having business with Australia, Nibblebits have sold products to Australia. Our managers in the office traveled often to Europe because their businesses was directly in line with the international world. And when you are working for such an organization, you are specifically in South Africa, and I do not talk about other international countries specifically. I talk about the South African process that affects the international world's communication. Because hand in hand, the countries make business with one another. Hand in hand, the countries are required to respond to the necessary requirements for the business itself, for the people of the country itself, relating to governmental processes, governmental discussions, relating to circumstances in the international world. I do not say the importance of that. I say that we are directly responsible to adhere to the requirement that is structured in and amongst the international world, right? When we have to adhere to the structure of the international world, we have an obligation as employees, and the business itself has an obligation. I've mentioned Regulation 1. That should, for me, be the business Regulation 1 is that business itself has a responsibility to really adhere to the company's requirement that relates most of the times to the employees itself. Every employment at every business affects the employee's personal day, affect your life journey, and you turn around and you learn that the process Nibblebits was not only your employment in 2011, but was the government and certain countries' peoples now tuning into Ribea, Elise, when I do my international Evoke work. And every process becomes that might chase your day about it, that might chase your life about it, that might chase certain requirements for you to respond at, and the necessity that is the importance for me to allow my opinion to be that is how do I introduce myself to the international world that now has brought all of the attention to me based on our opinion. That is, when you are an employee at the office, your opinion sometimes goes to different international businesses also. And therefore, only because we live in a world where people send a lot of information about you around the world, we have responsibility as people who sometimes find ourselves employees at the offices, and we learn that the communication around you might have been so much and might have affected the international world. And then we have responsibility to sometimes the interviewer educates us. When we get into the interview room, I've done the recruitment myself, and the interviewer says, but explain yourself quickly to the world. Because there's so many words that comes to the world about Ribea, Elise, the person, and social media has given us the advantage to exactly introduce yourself, Ribea, Elise, to the international world. And that is where we are at with how the businesses and business owners have a responsibility to adhere to regulation, and that is the responsibility to the employee, Ribea, Elise, that was employed at the offices. Every communication that goes to the international world about Ribea is now not necessarily a reference check that goes via the telephone, but Ribea, Elise, in our day and season, call it a hashtag message. The manager goes on Instagram, and the hashtag says something about Ribea, doesn't say Ribea's name, and Ribea says, does not necessarily give my name when I do a fashion photo, because the fashion photo are not edited with Ribea, Elise in the photo, but Ribea, Elise's name in the photo. But everything that we do nowadays becomes something that someone else listens from, and that someone else go and react. And therefore our responsibility is to give our opinion in a season where we all have a responsibility to recognize ourselves in all of these processes. When we're in business, sometimes we often learn to not recognize ourselves and to go on with the day, because I'm not the general manager, I'm just this employee and that employee and that employee, and we don't so often realize the responsibility that we have to ourselves to acknowledge ourselves in the room. And that's where Ribea, Elise, as a Vogue business is at in season. I'm going to quickly explain us through the SARS process that I've explained to us last week, right? I'm going to draft us through what I really gave my opinion on based on the VIP payroll system. That is the SARS international system. That is a computerized system that has the responsibility to hold information of the business itself, of the employees itself, and of the business structure and certain processes of the business itself. And therefore, the process that I feel as an employee that I've been employed in the processes, and I've had the time to get to study the process, I've had a time to get to study the program itself, and I've learned where in our generation the program finds itself at. What businesses works, what charge, where does the process go to, who are the office holder of the process itself. That is now not necessarily the computerized system that holds the information, but the countries that the information sometimes go to, right? Those office holders and the sensitivity of the process that now requires South African government to structure themselves, because the search process are not only holding information of Ribea, Elise's employment at Niblibits, but it holds information and it releases information to different countries. And different countries therefore have that they can read in on the information, they can exactly have the information in their countries, and the information has got Ribea, Elise at the office. And the system was just a computerized payroll system, but government has a responsibility to structure the process in the country itself, because where the world find themselves in aggression, in poverty, in war circumstances, the system are being managed in a way that it becomes an office holder for businesses in the country, and therefore the responsibility for South African government to manage and to structure that process specifically is the requirement for government to adhere to their responsibility to the employee, that is, do not endanger us while we find ourselves employed in the offices and our information goes onto the information system of that. And therefore, let us quickly just draft ourselves through the SARS, that is SARS South Africa. In New Zealand, it is IRD, and I've mentioned it last week. SARS and IRD, let's not get it wrong, right? We have SARS South Africa, and we have IRD New Zealand. SARS South Africa, SARS. The responsibility of SARS South Africa and the economy of South Africa itself. SARS are the main information holder of businesses, payroll information, certain structured processes of businesses, and SARS are directly the office of the South African government when it comes to the economy itself. So hand in hand with the economy, the poverty circumstances, the employment rate of the country, SARS is the number one system in New Zealand, IRD, the number one system that works hand in hand with the economy of the country. SARS is a governmental office of the country itself in South Africa. IRD New Zealand, governmental office of the country itself, of business itself. We call it business office of the country itself. And when we name it as business office, it is directly the state of the country itself, the economy itself, right? We call it the business. It's only information receiver, information releaser, but it's directly, we link it directly to the economy. And when we require the economical state information of the country, we directly sometimes work with SARS as governmental leaders to get those informations from the country itself. we do not allow ourselves to accept the fact that it's only the office room of the business, economical, mathematical, the numbers and the digits that goes along with how much does the country make in one time period, how much does businesses make in one time period in the country, right? So we do not only mathematically allow ourselves to only say that the system only has the process and the office SARS only has responsibility to the information that they share and receive. We allow ourselves to revise what we've mentioned last week, and that is the responsibility that SARS office itself has to the government. It's a governmental process. It's a governmental function. It's a governmental office. The responsibility that it has to the people of the country, right? To us being the people that finds ourselves being employed in the offices. It holds directly information of us. It releases directly information of us. It is directly the government that manages the process and the country's economy in a structured way, and therefore the payroll system that hands in hands. I know there's a lot of payroll systems that we have on the market, but the number one payroll system for Ribea, Elise, that works hand in hand, and I don't want to give my left hand, I want to give my right hand to everyone because we read how we also speak. So the governmental system that we directly work with in the international world, and the system of that to South Africa, the number one system that holds the information accurately is what Ribea and what I've been introduced with Nabibit, that used to be the SARG. SARG, S-A-G-E, the SARG, or in Africa, in South Africa, there's also there's different rooms of SARG, different office businesses, that is the system itself. And it's also called in South Africa VIP. New Zealand has got the office of the SARG of that also. I've worked at one of the organizations in New Zealand at Stamford Plaza, yes, and they had a part of SARG in their processes then. Or someone explained to me that New Zealand also have the office system SARG in New Zealand already. So SARG to us is a payroll system. But the payroll system has got the structured information of the organization on it. The payroll system, and VIP, in South Africa, the VIP part of the system that I've been introduced to has got the structured process of the organization itself. That you can buy into the SARG program, and the SARG program has got different functions in the business, and every part of the business can be directly information imported into the SARG system. The SARG system holds the complete information hand in hand with the payroll information of the organization itself. Number one program of that businesses use is the payroll function of it. And that we haven't mentioned last week, and I just want to mention it quickly so that we get to listen to what did I explain in our first video of Structure 2024 with this year. And the payroll function of that is the information that directly goes to SARS, right? So we're now not going to run to SARS and say about the training and the amount of training people that has to be trained. In South Africa, it is directly structured in this way that I've been introduced to the process at Nublibit. That is, it holds certain information, but you can't run to the SARS or the IRD office based on how the country trains people, how the training in the country should be, what levels people should be, and there's different processes of government that manages different parts. And the specific part that Ribea Elise is educating us to structure amongst humanity is not only the payroll information holder of that, but it was hand in hand with the economy of the country itself. The system directly holds information of every person. Last week we have mentioned that has been employed for 1 month in the organization. The system's information goes to government once a month at the end of the month, and government retrieves the information, and the information directly says that this is now 1,000 employees I've mentioned last week. And we need to now make sure that every month the organization structure is that the organization can employ 1,000 employees per month at employment. Government responsibility then is that the organization adhere to that process, that is the 1,000 people per month in employment. The system holds information of what salaries the people receive, what rates people are on, and the payroll system of that is directly that the SARS officers hold information on, that is based on the company structure. This is the employees, this is the salary rates of the company, this is the requirement for the employees to be paid on a monthly basis, and the information directly goes to government based on that from the SARS office, from that system. The accuracy of that system, to Ribea, Elise, is why we are discussing the SARS system and not any other payroll system. Because I've been introduced that nobody but says TNA system, yes. And the TNA system was a different payroll function, but we require the government to work on systems that are structured and that the information can go to the governmental houses in all accuracy, so that the world can learn on how does that system forms part of the economy of the world and how the economy of the world functions in 100 day or 100 month period, right? So that's why we're explaining specifically the SAGE, SAGE system, SARS payroll. Let me have a sip of water, thank you. So with the responsibility that government has to make sure that organizations abide to the requirement of the people of the country itself. So the requirement for the people of the country are sometimes not that difficult. The requirement is that every house in the country has a right to be provided for. And that's why we are specifically discussing CAGE, the SART, because we want the structure to be in such a way that no one has to run around for information about what we are discussing. The political house of the country has a responsibility to its people itself. The organization has a responsibility to the employees itself. And the employees includes the general manager, includes the business owner, it includes everyone that forms part of the business. So let us not divert our attention to the business owner also requires to be recognized. Let us allow ourselves to know that at any business, every employee is every person at any business. The responsibility of the organization itself that has to adhere to their responsibility being the business that employs the employee. The responsibility that the governmental house has to the employee and to the people in the country itself, that is our requirement to abide to the regulation and to the law and to our peoples and to whatever processes we are required to manage and to implement to deal and to manage our countries in a fair and in a fine, in an equal way, in a right from wrong way, in a fair way and in an equal way, right? So when we have been introduced to the structured process that is called now the SARS payroll function, payroll system program, we learned that the responsibility can sometimes shift from SARS office calling the other office and saying, but I want nothing to do with this process because this process is all over the place and government needs to give answers and discussion goes all over the place and no one wants to manage the process in a structured way because everyone sometimes wants to look at the country in poverty Everyone sometimes want to look at the world in aggression and in war. Everyone sometimes want to only work on the world, favoring a certain type of people amongst the world. And Elise in season says, but our responsibility as people in this world is to adhere to the requirement that is every one of us has got a responsibility. And if Ribea Elise were now sitting back and saying that my employment at Nibblebus was just an employment, then I would now exactly find myself in the seat that is that the world cannot do what it wants to oppress one another and to abuse one another. We have learned in this world that we all have a responsibility, and it's our requirement to allow ourselves to acknowledge ourselves in the responsibility that we all have in this world. And with acknowledging ourselves with that we are required to be responsible at. When we look at SARS payroll system, and we look at SARS offices, and we look at the information holder of the country itself, and we look at the information that government holds of the country itself, and we look at the structured requirement of the information holder, then we look directly at the organization's requirement and responsibility. We directly look at how many people are employed in the business itself. We directly look at how many people are unemployed in the community or in her country itself or in her region itself. And we directly look at what responsibility has the government got to structure more businesses so that the country can fend for its people in a fair way that they are required to. And that is why we do not divert our attention away from the SARS program itself, because we're working with numbers, we're working with mathematics, we're working with the scientific aggressions that are linked to poverty circumstances in the country. And therefore, we do not divert our attention. Science requires us to know that mathematically, scientifically, we can work a function and a process out in numbers itself. And that is why we are only keeping our attention on the SARS and on the SARS office holder of the system itself. The requirement that the country has to learn that an organization, if you keep track of the information of one country for a year period, then you learn that one organization can only employ so many people per month in the organization or per year at the organization. And when you learn that SARS payroll system and that SARS offices has got the accurate information. SARS gives the accuracy of the information because other companies uses different systems, and the SARS office hold the information of every other business that are using different systems and programs, right? So let's get that right, what I'm also trying to explain, so that no one diverts their attention off of what I'm actually trying to say. So when we learn that the information holder now is not only the information that we receive from SARS, because some people is going to want to keep us exactly there. So let us not tell ourselves that the information holder, according to Ribea Elise, is now SARS in the international world about it. We are saying the most accuracy of information, the most recent programs that really relates to the circumstances in our countries, has certain businesses work with the SARS for the accuracy of those informations, right? And because SARS is hand in hand with our generation itself in the currentness of where our generation finds themselves at. And only because of that, the SARS payroll function exactly holds the information. The information is that every business, this is the amount of businesses in South Africa in the year 2023. The amount of businesses in the country has a responsibility to employ so many employees at 1 year. The year 2023, the businesses have employed so many people, And based on that, we need to accurately communicate to the businesses to make sure that they adhere to their responsibility of how many people they are required to employ. And we do not say anyone else other than SARS are the direct communication between businesses and between the political house of the responsibility that businesses had to adhere to. That is the information shows that there's a requirement for 500,000 employees at the business in Hania, or for 2,000 employees in Hania at the business itself, and the business has only employed 1,500 employees, and the business are therefore required to adhere to the regulation, to the law itself, in a fair requirement and responsibility to the country itself, based on the country's voice in the country itself and its people, and based on the country's voice in the international world. And therefore, we do not require that information to go from anyone other than the legislative law house of the SARS officers, that is SARS, that is directly working for the government itself, and they need to directly be communicating from organizations directly from the SARS officers. That's a requirement and the responsibility that government has to structure the process in a way that the process is not going all over the place in the country, and then it goes all over the place in the world also. So that responsibility is SARS, has got a legislative responsibility to the country itself. Legislatively, it means SARS is SARS, and SARS is directly South African government. SARS is directly business holder information of the economy, the financial circumstances in the country itself. That is the employees that are being paid on a monthly basis. And SARS has a responsibility to the legislative side of the country itself, to the legislative office of the country, and to the legislative office of the international world. Why legislatively? Yale University, Oxford University, one of the best law firms international, and it doesn't mean that you only have a law certificate in your hand to say that you are the best law firm in the world. No, it means that legislatively the world sometimes depends on listening to the Yale officers that works hand in hand with South African universities, and that works hand in hand with our law universities, and therefore our responsibility when we deal with legislative issues in the international world, we have a requirement to structure the processes in a way that is fair in the country of South Africa, and in a way that is fair in the international world itself, right? So we do not work and sit around the table with the Yale teams and with the law teams. We do not sit in meetings with the international world so that we can just be part of the amazing meetings. No, we sit in those meetings so that Ribea Elise can say that legislatively you all have a responsibility on that day. And when Ribea Elise says we all have a responsibility, and we look at the Yale certificate of the best law firm in the world, and then we look at the requirement for our country to structure itself, because the legislative world today looks like they are dealing with so much crime, aggressions, wars, and poverty, that the structured requirement of South Africa is that they do not disturb the international world, but that they adhere to the requirement and responsibility of the international world itself. And when we say we adhere to the responsibility that we have as South African political leaders, as South African people, as South African community members, as people born from South Africa, we say that we adhere to that. There is a fair process in our country. And the fair process is the information in the country doesn't have to go all over the place. Ribea says, when I got to Niblibitz, I left my desk when I resigned there with a lot of documents to say that the circumstances that I've come familiar with in the office itself is all over the place. And I couldn't even find my way through this office work because I am one person. I can be all over the place myself, but there's certain things in the world that require structure. And that is where we are at with this education. So what we want to say So when we release and when we hold the information of every organization that is now send information to the SARS office, right? The business holder of the country itself. Let's say the business holder. It sounds a little bit easier to say the business holder. I say the office is, or the business office I've mentioned last week. The office holder, yes. When we are now sending as business owners and organizations our information to SARS, right? SARS then retrieves the information, and SARS exactly realizes, okay, this organization had so many employees, in the year had so many employees, and we exactly acknowledge the business itself, we exactly acknowledge the circumstances in the country, we exactly acknowledge the business's requirement and responsibility, and we exactly then request of the business to adhere to that. That is, the business's requirement is to employ the amount of people that the business are required to employ in one month or in one year period. For the year 2023, the business had a responsibility to employ 2,000 employees. The business only employed 1,500 employees. And based on our payroll information that we have received, the accuracy of that is that the business only employed 500 employees. We request that the business adhere to the structure and that the business adhere to the legislative requirement of the country, and that the business employs the 2,000 people in one required year or one month period that they are required to employ. That information directly communicated to the general manager of the business itself and directly communicated through from the SARS office's law department, legislative room, from the SARS and IRD offices itself. And that's their responsibility when it comes to the poverty state of the countries. That's for 1 year, for 1 month period, and the communication needs to be in a timely manner. Timely means in a required. Timely means in a communication that the business understand the requirement to adhere to the law. Right, and to adhere to its people, right? The law shouldn't only for us, when we say the law, that everyone shouldn't think Ribea is not only talking about a document or drafted room of people. When we say law, we need to recognize ourselves in that room, because we form part every day of the law discussions and of the crime rate and of poverty and of everything that happens in the country itself. So when we communicate the information then from SARS directly to the businesses, and the businesses directly learns the requirement and responsibility to adhere to the process, then government has got control over managing the employment rate of the country. Based on that, the government learns to know how many people in the country are then required to be employed, how many people can the businesses in the country plan to employ in 1 year, and how many businesses are we required to implement so that the country abides to its requirement to its people itself. And so the country's opinion in the international world are not being received as an unfair opinion based on the poverty circumstances of the country, South Africa itself. So when South Africa sits with the international world in meetings and in responsibility to the international world, the international world cannot point finger at South Africa to say that South Africa are treating its people fairly, but South Africa want to manage processes in certain countries. But then South Africa can really allow themselves to adhere to their requirement and responsibility that they have to the people and to the international world itself. And international world, we include international sports, we include international education processes, and the schools, the primary schools. South Africa can't contact New Zealand schools and give New Zealand schools a requirement to adhere to if South Africa's processes are unfair, because then New Zealand is also going to look aggressed in poverty and all of the things that can happen in processes that are not structured behind. So let us get the complete process right of that. Another thing that we then require businesses to do and the South African government to adhere to would be, once the South African government has got control over businesses adhering to their responsibility, South African government has then got the opportunity to then learn what processes are they required to implement so that every people in the country that has a right to be employed find themselves then in employment in the country itself. And then South Africa has got a structured process because SARS VIP payroll makes it easy for South Africa. The SARS officers makes it easy for South Africa because they directly then work with the organizations, the lawyers, and they directly allows themselves to adhere to the responsibility that they have as a business as a business office legislative holder of the country. And then South Africa can then work on businesses that are required to be structured and that are required to be implemented so that the country can, in a fair way, then lead the international world, or in a fair way, then assist the international world in management processes that are required in the international world, right? International world once again works with South Africa. It's international sports. It is the education department. That is Yale University, Stellenbosch University. That is the primary schools and the secondary schools in South Africa, in New Zealand, in Europe, in America. Those schools sit in meetings and they work together on processes. And therefore, we need the fairness in the country to really be that is in line with the country's responsibility to the international world. The country don't think that fairness today is that one might have done a crime and let's put that house in poverty. Ribea Sadim's family might have done a crime and we don't know if they've done a crime or not. Let's put their house in poverty, and then half of South Africa sits in poverty and half of South Africa sits and have a good time, and the prisoners get out of prison and they went to prison for people that now really were now trying to sometimes oppress them, and when they get out of prison they're so angry, and then South Africa wants to sit sometimes and be the opinion in international sports and in the international education functions and in the churches and leadership in certain countries. And then South Africa has to learn to adhere to what are they required to do to structure themselves so that they do not aggress or oppress the international world. So when government adhere to their responsibility, SARS officers adhere to their responsibility, government learns that based on the information that we have received from SARS officers and from the SARS payroll companies and from the payroll systems of the countries, and specifically from SARS, right? We now have place to set up so many businesses in the country to employ so many people in the country. And every year, government has a responsibility to allow themselves to reveal the documents to the international world, that is now the international sports, the international education systems, the international church functions, the international business world, so that they are in having a fair seat in the international world, and that they do not oppress the international world with unfair processes coming from the country itself, right? So that is our responsibility mainly. Further on, we will again discuss any other business requirements and responsibilities, specifically the journey that I have been on, that I have learned, my requirement to know how businesses and offices in the world functions and communicates with one another, right? That's the different part of where we are at today. Today we want to only have our attention to the structured requirement of business itself in the country, of the people itself in the country, of the governmental house itself in the country, to adhere to the responsibility to its people and to its responsibility to the international world. And its responsibility sometimes doesn't have to go all over the place. Its responsibilities, the world has made it easier for one another, that the world work only on certain programs and processes and systems. And one of the main systems that the world functions on is the SARS payroll function, and it directly communicates with the payroll and the SARS offices in South Africa itself, and they have a responsibility to allow themselves to understand their requirement as a SARS office and how they need to be in line with the structured requirement of the country itself. And once everyone know what their requirement is, Adhere to your requirement, adhere to your responsibility. Acknowledge yourself in it. Don't endanger yourselves by having processes all over the place. Allow yourselves to acknowledge yourselves in the processes that y'all are, owning, and seats that y'all are owning in those processes itself. Another thing that we want to mention, and once everyone has now learned that South Africa has got so many businesses and they only function to fund so many houses in South Africa in one month, and so many people in South Africa are actually unemployed in one month, then South Africa knows what to implement. South Africa then reveals that information once a year to the international sports committees, to the international law house of the world, to the international education functions of the world, to submit their seat that they are having in the international world, so that they do not, and so that the international world doesn't go and chase Ribea, Elise in New Zealand, because South Africa has managed the process wrong, and so that the international world doesn't divert us the whole time all around with aggressions and arguments. And that is our requirement and responsibility, and that's the only structured requirement we want to focus on with week 2 of our Leading This Generation structure with Ribea, Elise. Other than that, everyone, we can again next week discuss anything further that we want to discuss. Our next Leading This Generation discussion would be once we have done week 3 of the structured requirement that we have as leaders and as people, that we are having to acknowledge ourselves at what where we find ourselves at in the international world and international requirement for humanity to adhere to, not abide to, but to adhere to, right? There is a difference. Let's do translation word. I like to do translation words on my about post. And translation words is when you translate a word into how do you feel to explain the word for yourself, and what does the word adhere to means for you in all that you are listening to when you say the word adhere. So when I do translations and I do it in my own understanding and in my own listening, what is the opinion that I feel that goes hand in hand with adhere, right? And the opinion of that my opinion has got a responsibility, and I always say that I'm responsible when I give my opinion, right? And I've mentioned that the whole time through, and I've mentioned to everyone that I have the responsibility that we have to acknowledge ourselves, right? Adhering means that I own and I acknowledge myself in the responsibility that I have. And when I adhere to myself, I know I want to have myself be safe and fine where I'm at. So adhering means I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that I adhere and acknowledge myself in every opinion that I give. And when we learn to acknowledge ourselves, we learn to acknowledge the people around us. And therefore, we find our way easy through that, that someone else might misunderstand you on anything. You can say anything in the world, and people would argue against you about it. And therefore, you acknowledge yourself in everything that you say. And you learn that sometimes you are required to say things because the world are anyway going to want to argue with you about it. And the world are anyway busy sometimes with their own processes. And only because of that, we adhere to acknowledge ourselves in where we give our opinion at, and we take responsibility when we give our opinions. So that is it, everyone, for today with Ribea, Elise, with our structured requirement and responsibility being the South African House of Power, they say, House of Honor. And the South African House of Honor. What does House of Honor means? We honor our father and our mother. We honor the birth womb of South Africa. We honor our right being the people of the country, the baby of the country. And no matter how old we are, we honor our parents that has birthed us, and our responsibilities to the country and our responsibilities to the people. We honor that with everything that we are doing and that we are sometimes required to do. And the South African House of Honor, let us honor the world and let us manage those processes in a fine, fine way for everyone. Have an amazing week further, everyone.